You may be seated. His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Zuma, the Deputy President Ramaphosa, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Mbete, and other presiding officers, ministers, deputy ministers, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, His Excellency Ambassador Mpoko, the Ambassador of the DRC to South Africa, ambassadors and other high commissioners and other members of the Diplomatic Corps, business leaders, labor leaders, good evening. It is my privilege and honor to welcome you all to this 2016 Africa Day celebration on behalf of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. We trust that you are going to enjoy this occasion of celebration of the unity of the progress being made by the African continent since its founding as the Organization of African Unity in 1963, now the African Union. At this point, I would like to invite my cabinet colleague, Minister of Science and Technology, Minister Pando, to welcome you all. Minister.
Thank you very much, Minister Khadebe, Program Director. Your Excellency, the President, President Zuma, the Honorable Deputy President Ramaphosa, Honorable Speaker Mbete and presiding officers present here this evening, Honorable colleagues, ministers and deputy ministers, Honorable members of Parliament, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador Mpoko, Excellencies, Ambassadors, and High Commissioners. I had an opportunity to speak to Minister Khadebe earlier today, and I told him that I thought he actually does very excellent welcomes. And so I couldn't understand the reason, Mr. President, for me to do a welcome this evening, and I think he's done brilliantly, actually. But distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I speak on behalf of my colleague who could not be with us this evening, Minister Nkwani Mashabane, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. I'm honored to have the opportunity on her behalf to welcome you all to this wonderful occasion of the Africa Day Gala Dinner, hosted by our distinguished President, President Zuma. Mr. President, we are greatly privileged and humbled to have you in our midst, and especially privileged that you are hosting us at this momentous event. On the 25th of May every year, Africans in various parts of the world celebrate Africa Day. And in fact, Mr. President, Africa Day has a very special place in my own mind. I don't know whether the President would recall that on the 25th of May, 2012, His Excellency the President hosted the African diaspora in Johannesburg. And it was on that day that we received the decision that South Africa and Africa would be the host of the Square Kilometre Array. And the President announced that on Africa Day. On the 25th of May each year, we Africans in various parts of the world come together to celebrate Africa Day. We proudly connect in all forms possible with our fellow Africans in commemorating the establishment of the Organization of African Unity. Its founders gathered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and formed the then OAU in 1963, which became our current African Union in 2002. They were inspired and guided by the ideals of Pan-Africanism, which has its origins in the struggles of the African people against enslavement and colonization. These struggles began in the early wars against imperialism. They began in the resistance on slave ships. then on plantations, and eventually in the anti-colonial uprisings of the 19th century. However, it was in the 20th century that Pan-Africanism emerged as a distinct political movement, initially formed and led by people from our African people from the diaspora, and then subsequently taken over on the continent. As we pay today homage to our African heroes and heroines, past and present, we must reflect on what still needs to be done in pursuance of the ideals of Pan-Africanism. We live in a complex world, but Africa's future lies in our hands. Africa Day allows the leadership of our continent to share with our citizenry and our fellow Africans in the diaspora a range of initiatives, mechanisms, and activities which are being undertaken to improve their lives. In essence, this occasion provides us an opportunity to reflect on the journey thus far, with a view to charting the way forward. Most importantly, distinguished guests, we have a collective responsibility to ensure that Africans continue to work to implement economic development initiatives and other socio-economic related programs. Our people must enjoy the right to access the skills that they require to be active participants in improving their future. Our responsibility, therefore, is to create conditions within which all the human potential for development can be unleashed on our continent. Excellency, Mr. President, your government's initiative to craft and implement a month-long program to commemorate Africa Day is yielding positive results. This initiative has made a significant contribution to a better comprehension of the importance of Africa Day amongst our people, particularly the young people of South Africa. It's most heartening to note that children across our country took a moment earlier today to sing the African Union anthem. This is a further demonstration of the importance we attach to our continent, Africa. It is imperative that Africans grow up knowing our inherent values and principles and indeed living them. Dear Mr. President, Deputy President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with these few words, I would like to once more welcome you all, as Minister Hadebe has done, and to wish you a most enjoyable evening in this beautiful part of our land. As we popularly say, Africa is on the rise. May it continue to be on the rise. I welcome you all.
Thank you, Minister Pando. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, it is now my honor and privilege to respectfully invite His Excellency, the President of the Republic, to deliver his keynote address. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Please, we may be seated. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director of the program. Well, as I always say, you want me to do something with the keynote and address, but you didn't give me the key and the note with an address where I will open. So I don't have it, so I'm not going to give that one. Honorable Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Baleka Mbete, Ministers and Deputy Ministers, Honorable Members of Parliament, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, and all excellencies, the ambassadors and high commissioners, captains of industry, fellow South Africans and friends. We are delighted to share this 2016 celebration of Africa Day with all of you. Today marks 53 years since the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. The OAU was transformed into our present-day African Union, AU, in 2002 in Durban. We are celebrating a day under the theme, quote unquote, building a better Africa and a better world, which is the goal of our government and our nation to contribute in whatever small way we can to improving our continent and to building a better world. The background to this day is important just to touch upon it so that we appreciate where we come from. As you know, Africa suffered a great deal from a number of things. I think my colleagues have touched upon this. It supplied the majority of slaves in Europe and the United States. The only continent that another continent had a conference to discuss and agree that they must share many parts of it, and then got colonized. And of course, it had to take Africans to stand up on their own to liberate themselves. It is that background that became important for the leaders and countries who were already free, who felt that it was necessary to do something about the liberation of the continent, and had a lot of interaction and consultations leading up to some few organizations that were established before the establishment of the OAU. Coming on mind quickly was PAFMECA, which was established, which did not include Southern Africa then. So with the liberation of Southern Africa, few countries and many countries unliberated, there was a need to include Southern Africa. And once it was included, that organization changed to PAFMECSA. And that was one organization that deliberated about the establishment of a continental organization, thus leading to the establishment of the OAU. Precisely because this was about Africa, was about the development of Africa and unity of Africa on one hand, but on the other, the liberation of Africa. When the leaders gathered in Ethiopia, the leaders of liberation movements were also invited to participate at a level of observers. That's why leaders like Robert Mugabe, Nelson Mandela, who was out of the country at the time, clandestinely, and Oliver Tambo participated, and that position became the position of the liberation movement as observers. Whenever there was a summit, they participated as observers. But those who get freedom will then become members. Among other things they did was to establish a subcommittee called the AU Liberation Committee, which then looked specifically at the struggle waged by the liberation movements. And therefore, when we meet and celebrate today, we celebrate the victories that we have scored, the successes that we have made, but also celebrate those who sacrificed with their lives, with spending a long time and many years on prisons, not only Robben Island. You know that Kenyatta was also sentenced to 5 years, and many others. So it is these that we celebrate, but also encourage ourselves to go forward. Well, there were two objectives, as I've just indicated. One, to liberate Africa that was not liberated. The other, to unite and develop the African countries. And it is at this point where we can talk about the development of the continent, which then had a different kind of life, so to speak, because the colonial countries had made the Africans in those countries to believe and forced them to believe they belonged to them. For an example, if we were colonized by the Portuguese, you were then made to believe that there is a big city called Lisbon, which was your capital. If we were colonized by the British, it was London, which was your capital. By the French, it was Paris. And the borders were so hard that even if we were neighbors, we could speak different languages and believe that we're more connected to what was then called the mother countries than your neighbors. There was no intertrade. In actual fact, we use the terminology which has now it's almost disappearing. Some were called Francophone, others Anglophone, etc., etc. So we have moved and succeeded to liberate ourselves in many ways. And these are the things we are succeeding. We have come together, broke down the barriers that were created. We talk today of not just African unity or OAU, but we talk about African Union. As a progress, there is a process that has moved. We talk today, we no longer say we need the intertrade. We are working hard to do so. We are working on the infrastructure that connects all of us. We are moving away from the time when, if you were called an African, you were made to believe you're inferior. We are at the stage where we are proud to be Africans and to do our own things in our own continent. So when we celebrate today and encourage ourselves, we think of this kind of background. So it is important for us just to bear this background in mind as we celebrate. It is therefore for us very important that on this day we come together and look back. And because of this background, the leaders of our continent came together in 1963 because they saw the need for Africans to unite and fight for their freedom, independence, dignity, development, and prosperity together. Not to be separated by the colonialists, but to fight together. The African leaders realized that without unity, Africa would not move far in achieving her goals. On Africa Day, we celebrate the triumph of the African peoples against slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and other political ills and forms of subjugation. We are also celebrating the progress we are making in building a better Africa, working together within the ambit of the AU. On Africa Day, we pay homage to the great African men and women who fought tirelessly to ensure that Africa is free from bondage and to ensure the return of African dignity. These were selfless leaders who wanted to see only the best for the African continent and wanted to see freedom reign in every corner of Africa. Kwame Nkrumah proclaimed on the day that Ghana gained independence, and I quote, "Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa," unquote. It is this selflessness that we must remember, that we must remember and cherish always in their memory. Africa has partners in all the regions of the world: Asia, North America, South America, the Middle East, New Zealand, and Australia, and indeed all over. Today, with our partners in these regions, we seek to build a better and more just world, and to build a prosperous Africa, free of poverty, unemployment, disease, and underdevelopment. We want an Africa with modern infrastructure, where one can fly from one country to another within the continent without having to go via Europe. We want an Africa where people are able to drive or ride by rail from one country to another with greater ease. It is for this reason that we are working under the auspices of the African Union to build infrastructure that will boost economic development in our continent. We are also working to achieve regional integration and to promote trade amongst ourselves as Africans, as inter-trade remains very low, standing at a mere 11%. In this regard, we envisage concluding the negotiations for a continental free trade area next year. In doing so, we are fulfilling the wishes of our forebears. Kwame Nkrumah outlined the vision of a prosperous Africa. Kwame Nkrumah said at the founding of the OAU in 1963, and I quote, "We shall accumulate machinery and establish steel works, iron foundries, and factories. We shall link the various states of our continent with communications by land, sea, and air. We shall cable from one place to another, phone from one place to the other, and astound the world with our hydroelectric power. We shall drain marshes and swamps, clear infested areas, feed the undernourished, and rid our people of parasites and disease." Unquote. It is up to us now to work harder ever to achieve this vision that was outlined by the founding fathers of our continent. The African Union Socio-Economic Blueprint Agenda 2063 perfectly captures the vision of where we want to take Africa and to build the African and the Africa we want. There is synergy between Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals that we adopted as member states of the United Nations in September last year. Most importantly, their sterling work has put continental self-reliance at the center of our collective endeavors. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot continue to be producers and exporters of raw materials. We need to strengthen the manufacturing capacities of our national economies through industrialization. More importantly, the beneficiation of our raw materials remains a paramount importance. The mineral wealth of Africa must help eradicate poverty in the African continent. And we do have the mineral wealth in abundance as a continent. Kwame Nkrumah pointed out in 1963, and this remains relevant today. He had this to say, and I quote, "It is said, of course, that we have no capital, no industrial skill, no communications, and no internal markets, and that we cannot even agree among ourselves how best to utilize our resources for our own social needs. Yet, all stock exchanges in the world are preoccupied with Africa's gold, diamonds, uranium, platinum, copper, and iron ore." Unquote. Your Excellencies, Africa cannot be left behind in the age of the fourth industrial revolution. Sustainable development we seek will come about through the use of modern technology and also through improving education in the continent. We must take advantage of the global digital revolution so as to create employment and better the lives of our people. The situation which we find ourselves in can be changed. We are a very youthful continent, and investment in education and skills development will take Africa closer to the goals of sustainable development and an end to hunger, disease, and deprivation. Furthermore, our energy needs in the continent have increased. According to the International Energy Agency, Sub-Saharan Africa witnessed a 45% rise in energy needs since the year 2000. The electrification of the continent thus remains a key priority and one of the most important infrastructure goals. Remarkable advances have already been made in solar and wind energy, among others. These efforts will not only enable us to satisfy our energy needs in the foreseeable future, but will also assist us to reduce carbon emissions. We can achieve all these goals. We need to draw inspiration from the word of our iconic leader, Nelson Mandela, who said, and I quote, "It always seems impossible until it is done," unquote. Your Excellencies, we can confidently say that Africa led the way with practical actions towards the realization of the December 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, long before the said agreement was signed in April 2016. We are proud of the contribution of the COP17 Climate Change Conference in Durban, as the Durban Platform of Action led the way towards the signing of the agreement in Paris. This was significant progress by the African continent. We also need to diversify our economies in order to be globally competitive. I do believe that unlocking the full potential of Africa's ocean economy is overdue. South Africa is already investing in the ocean's economy in a big way. We have already unlocked 17 billion rand worth of investments in the ports and the other aspects of the ocean's economy. Agenda 2063 is very clear about the importance of our ocean's economies and states that Africa's blue economy, which is 3 times the size of its landmass, shall be a major contributor to continental transformation and growth. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, pockets of conflicts in the continent have potential to limit the realization of our socio-economic development goals. It is for this reason that the AU has prioritized peace and security. We have taken a resolution that the guns must be silenced in the continent by 2020. We want an Africa that is at peace with itself, an Africa where women and children live without fear of attacks, an Africa where there are no displaced people and refugees. The continent is doing something to end the conflicts. What has been of concern is the ability of the concerned to respond with speed when conflict breaks out in order to protect lives. The African capacity for immediate response to crisis, which was established in November 2013 to fulfill this goal, will remain in place. This mechanism will be replaced by the African Standby Force at a time to be decided by the continent's leadership. Your Excellencies, while we work hard to address challenges faced by the continent, we cannot turn a blind eye to changes faced by humanity in other parts of the world. We are thus troubled by the tragic migration crisis in Europe, which is being exploited by criminal elements to commit various crimes. The European Union Commission has recently released a report which links increased human trafficking to the current migration challenges in the region. The seriousness of this matter requires our urgent collective action. I'm certain that we all have realized that there is a need to resolve the challenges in countries where migrants come from. We will be short-sighted to believe that migration crisis can only be managed, whereas it can actually be prevented. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, as Africans, we have the responsibility to move Africa closer to the goal of prosperity. We are making steady progress towards that goal with the support of development partners from all over the world. Let me, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, wish you an enjoyable evening and a most wonderful Africa Day celebration. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that keynote address. You may be seated. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, while you are enjoying your starters, let me say one thing. There is a man, Mr. President, at SABC called Claudi Mutsweneng, who about 10 days ago announced that SABC will be broadcasting local content 90%, which is a very revolutionary act by the SABC to promote local talent. And this evening, the President has decided that we're going to be increasing that 90% for this evening to be 100% local content. You're going to be listening to very young South Africans, very gifted South Africans, black. We're going to be rendering music out of this world in the performance we're going to be enjoying this evening. And that is the Market Theatre production. The Market Theatre Ensemble will be rendering something tonight. So as an amateur musical producer myself, I had a preview of it. I'm sure you are going to enjoy it as I did enjoy it in the preview. The Market Theatre Ensemble, please. Thanks.